Hello everybody, welcome back to Read and Reread. I am Angelia, and today another week has rolled around and it's time for Friday Reads. If there's anything major in the bookish world going on this week, I think I've missed it. I don't have anything in that realm to report. I don't have anything interesting in the TV realm to report either. Stephen was out of town this week. He went to help out his dad for a few days and I stayed here, so I didn't start any shows that I thought we'd both like. I found a couple of possible things, but I saved them, and I couldn't really find anything just for me. There was some movies I wanted to see, and they weren't accessible anywhere. I sampled a couple of shows that I didn't like so much. The only thing that I watched in its entirety, it was only an hour long, was Poop Cruise on Netflix. I didn't know there was a whole series called Trainwreck about different things that have gone disastrously wrong, and I don't know if all of them are kind of funny. Like, this was sort of horrific but funny, and that was the way it was played. It was very cheesy, but it still was an hour of entertainment. I know some people love cruises, but I have heard too many bad stories. I mean, just the things that could go wrong, and then you're trapped out there in the middle of the ocean. I could not take a cruise. So anyway, it was terrible and horrific and entertaining. I'm not really recommending it. It is really dumb, but that's what I watched, and I'm here to confess it. So we can just rocket right into the book report. So since last week, I did finish reading The Buffalo Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones. It's a horror novel. It's a historical fiction novel. It's about Indigenous history. It qualified for June on the Range, except it's July, and it qualified for Big Book Summer. It was definitely beyond my comfort zone as in the horror realm. The amount of violence and gore. Some of it's horror violence, and some of it's historical human violence. And this is just sort of a content warning. It's very bloody. I mean, it is a vampire story, so there's that kind of thing. And then there's just horrific events that happened in the American West between white and indigenous people. And there's also one scene of sexual violence in this book. So those are the trigger warnings. But setting that aside, it was really a good book. It had a lot going on. I talked a lot about it last week, so I'm not going to go back over that too much, but I really liked the structure. In the modern day, a journal is found hidden within the walls of an old sanctuary of a church, and the great-great-great-granddaughter of the person who wrote this journal is reading them. She's a professor. She's hoping that there's material here that she can use to write something. She's trying to get tenure. And what she reads is the journal of this great-great-great-grandfather chronicling what was happening in his town in Montana in 1912 and the series of conversations he had with an indigenous man named GauZ, who wants to confess some things that have happened over the past 50, 60 years. And his story is a vampire story and a story of personal reckoning, a story of revenge, and maybe the reckoning applies to more than one person in the story. And so then there is, I said last week, I didn't know when we were going to get back to the outermost layer of this frame, which is Etsy's story in the current day, and that does happen at the end of this book. That is maybe, I don't know if it's a weakness. I don't read a lot of horror, and for what I do read and for what I watch sometimes, things tend to get pretty far out and crazy near the end. It just seems to be a standard in the genre that things are going to get, there's got to be something a little extreme near the end, and Stephen Graham Jones does deliver that in this novel. It seemed like a little much. I can't really tell you anything more specific about it, but if you've read it, you can agree or disagree that some of the things that happened right near the end seem to be a little bit over the top. And I do have some lingering questions. I have unanswered questions about a couple of things. in the resolution of this plot. So overall, it was a success story. I do recommend it with those warnings that the content is pretty intense. So if you're not okay with that, it might be too much. But otherwise, I thought it was solid, and and then at the end, there's a long conversational afterward that has a lot. It's very interesting. It's very chatty, and he talks a lot about his influences and things that he read, and it was very interesting. But don't read it till you read the books. There might be spoilers in there. That was kind of silly. Why would you pick up a book and immediately read the afterword or the acknowledgments? Anyway, it was a hit, but it was a lot, and I have to build up my stockpile of horrific stamina before I read another horror novel. So, and the other book that I finished this week was Sweat by Lynn Nottage. This is a play, and this is one of the 2 plays this month in my project Endless Drama, where we're reading 2 plays a month from the 20th and 21st century. And I think I don't know if I mentioned this in a video or in a comment, but I think I'm going to roll this back to 1 a month next year, because when I chose to do 2 a month, I was super excited and I could not narrow down this huge list of plays I wanted to read. And I thought, well, hey, they're short. We could just do 2 a month. And I didn't foresee that I was going to decide to do a 60 by 60 project, which required me basically to keep a pace of 4 books a month dedicated to that project, and then all the other stuff that I just like to participate in and other groups I've joined. And even though the plays are short, I think 1 a month would have been okay, but that's live and learn. But this particular play, this was a Pulitzer Prize winner from, I think, 2017. She is the first woman to win the Pulitzer Prize 2 times. The other was for a play called Ruined. And so now I'm interested to read that. So Sweat has a 2 time period structure. The play takes place in 2000 and 2008. The very opening scene is a conversation between a parole officer and a young man, and then that same parole officer and a different young man. And the 2 young men, we find, have been in prison for several years. They've gotten out, they're reporting, and what they're telling their parole officer is that they ran into the other guy. And they're talking about how that went and how they felt about it. But we don't know who these guys are or what they did or why they were in prison. And then we get into the main story. And in that story, it does travel back and forth between the 2 time periods, but it takes place mostly in 2000. And we have a group of factory workers who hang out in a particular bar. Every scene takes place in the bar. We have a limited cast. There's the bartender Stan, who used to work in the factory until he had a serious injury. We have Oscar, who works in the bar at doing the bussing the tables, washing dishes, etc., but he's looking for a different job opportunity. And then we have the factory workers that come in and hang out at the bar. And we find out through their conversations that in this town of Reading, Pennsylvania, which, thank you to everyone who corrected my pronunciation when I said it wrong in the July TBR. It's Reading, Pennsylvania. We hear about how this is sort of a multi-generational blue-collar factory worker town, and people have stories about when their parents worked at this factory and another factory that used to be in the town, and how things used to be, and the legacy of continuing, and the struggles that they're having with the management, the union. So that's in the backdrop. And the whole time, we occasionally move out to the other time period, and we know as we read that we're going closer and closer to finding out what happened. As we find out who the 2 younger men are, what happened, and there's a sense of tension rising. In one way, it was kind of dark and depressing, but there is an element of hopefulness to it as well. By the time you get to the end of the play, you're kind of left with a mixed bag of sadness and hope. So, and I thought it was interesting that although it was written in 2017, or that's when it won the prize, and it refers to events in 2000 and 2008, and particularly economic pressures of those times. But it's still very timely. It's a snapshot of those years, but if she had changed the setting, it's pretty relevant now as well. There's always seems to be an endless kaleidoscope of reasons that people's livelihoods and way of life are being threatened by forces that they can't entirely control. The crush of industry seems to keep going. So that was a good play, but kind of on the sadder side. Not on a sad side is the ongoing reading of Emma by Jane Austen. This is just so delightful. I'm really enjoying participating in Jane Austen July and reading this with the big group read that's going on. Just reading a couple of chapters a day, getting to talk about that with other people, and within the group discussion, there's a rereader's corner, so there's a place to safely talk about everything without worrying about spoilers, because everybody has read it at least once, and then we can just zoom in on any little personality quirks or particular scenes and lines, and it's just a good time. It's a kind of a beacon of lightness in the midst of some darker reading that I've been doing. But back to the darkness, I'm also reading All the Water in the World by Eiren Caffal. And this is one of the books this month in the science fiction double feature, my project, my speculative wing of my 60 before 60 project. It's post-apocalyptic. This is a story about a young girl named Noni. She has been living on the roof of the Natural History Museum in New York City since the time that rising floodwaters and horrific climate change induced storming has kind of taken over probably the world. We don't really know because at some point communications from the outside world ceased. So there's several time frames in this book, and at first I was a little confused because they go back and forth really quickly. The chapters are super short. Sometimes within a chapter there's a flashback. But the times that get referred to are when Noni and her family, her parents and her sister, lived in a regular apartment in New York City, and her parents worked at the museum. And then from the viewpoint of a child of about 13, we get the idea that things started to change in the outside world. The family retreated one night in the midst of a horrific flood to the museum, and several other people who also had keys to the museum who worked there congregated there, and they made a place to live using supplies from inside the museum and a kind of a tent city on the roof. They found a way to live. So far, the part of this book that I liked the most, I was wishing that we would have stayed with it, which was that world, like living in and on a museum and all the details about that and how they made a society. That's the part of the book that I think is different and unique. But unfortunately, I thought that that's what this whole book was about, but it isn't. It turns into a we gotta hit the road kind of story, although it's more like we gotta hit the river because everything's so flooded. And so then it turns into a survival the road kind of story. And so the suspense continues, but it's less unique of a story because I've read that story a lot of times. We're on the road, we can't trust anybody, people we encounter have different systems going on. Some of them seem okay, but they're not, and there's danger, and there's creeps, but all the things that you can think of that happen in a survival post-apocalyptic story when the people are kind of traveling along, all those things are happening. My favorite part of the book, besides the part back at the museum, is Noni's water log, where she's trying to keep a record of her life, the knowledge she's accumulated, the things that she thinks are worth saving. Those parts that are interspersed, I really love her voice. I don't know, I only have, something like 30 or 40 pages left. And I really don't know how this is going to conclude, and I've probably talked about it too much, but that's what it's about. So I am liking it. I wouldn't say I'm loving it, but part of it is because I've read so many books in this genre, and I can't help but compare. If you're going to move into territory that seems like it was covered in other books, I'm going to think about those other books, and I'm looking for something different, better, memorable. We'll see if I get it. And then finally, I am also reading a very short novel. I don't think I'm even halfway through this one, but it's very short, so I will read it this weekend, and it's called Standing Heavy. And I'm not sure if the pronunciation of this author's name, but I'm going to put it on the screen. GauZ, and the translator is Frank Wynne. It's about men who work as security guards in Paris, men that are from different African nations. The main characters in the book are from the Ivory Coast, and it's about how they live and work like invisible people in this thriving, vibrant city, and all of their very acute observations of all the dramas and things going on around them while they're at work, basically not being noticed or observed in return. There's a kind of a humorous, sarcastic voice. The style is pretty odd. It's very choppy. It's like vignettes of observations, almost like somebody is keeping a journal and just collecting their notes, but that's the book. And so I haven't gotten too far. I'll say something more about it next week after I have finished. Upon completion of either of those books, I have a lot of opportunities about what to read next, one of which is to pick up that reread that I made the video about the other day. And that was really fun. If you didn't see it, it's the video I made on Tuesday where I shared several books, and I'm trying to choose one to reread before the month runs out. And I had a really good time considering each of the books on camera, and then the responses are great. People made such excellent arguments for the different books. I'd have to count them up and see if there's actually one in the lead. At different times, it seemed like a different book was in the lead. I don't know if there's actually a winner or just a lot of good energy and thoughts about why I should read each and every one of these books, which I'm going to do. It's more a matter of timing, like which one to read right now versus next month and the month after that. But what I do know now is that I don't need to add anything else to this reread pile until I complete these, because everybody made such great pitches for them that I want to start them all immediately. So what will I actually choose? Stay tuned and you will find out in the near future. And I think that about wraps it up. I don't even really know what we're doing this weekend. Stephen has returned, so we will find something good to watch and something good to go do together. And I hope you do as well, and that you have a couple of good books sitting by your side. Have a great weekend, and I'll be back soon. Bye-bye.